Assalamu alaikum everyone. In this video, we will be discussing paper 1 of O-level biology 5090. The year is May June 2019 and the variant is 1. Let's start. MCQ number 1. The diagram shows a cell from a plant leaf and a cell from an animal skin. So guys, this is the plant cell which is taken from the plant leaf, and this is the animal cell that is taken from animal skin. Which part will stain blue black with iodine solution? So guys, anything, any part which contains starch will stain blue black with iodine solution, because as you all know that starch stains blue black with iodine solution. So any part that contains starch will turn blue black with iodine solution. So you should know that chloroplasts are the site of photosynthesis, and in photosynthesis carbohydrates are being produced such as glucose. So these glucose molecules or carbohydrate molecules or sugar molecules, they are converted to starch and stored. So you will always find starch in chloroplasts. So answer is B. Why is B the answer? Because B is the chloroplast and chloroplasts contain starch, and starch stains blue black with iodine solution. Let's move on to MCQ number 2. The diagram shows a plant cell after being placed in a solution for an hour. So guys, we can look at the plant cell. This plant cell is plasmolysed. This plant cell is plasmolysed. So guys, what is the feature of plasmolysed plant cell? A plant cell which is plasmolysed has lost a lot of water, due to which the cell shrinks and the cell surface membrane loses contact with the cell wall. We can see that cell surface membrane has lost contact with the cell wall, or cell surface membrane has detached from the cell wall. So this is the hallmark, or this is the feature of plasmolysed cell, that cell membrane will detach from the cell wall due to the water loss from the cell. What provides the explanation for the appearance of this cell? The cell has gained water and is turgid? No. The cell has gained water and is no longer turgid? No. The cell has lost water and is turgid? No, guys. The cell has lost water and is no longer turgid? Yes. The cell has lost water and now it's not swollen. Turgid means that the cell is swollen. Right now the cell is not swollen. The cell is shrunken and the cell is plasmolysed. It's no longer turgid and the cell has lost water. So the answer is D. Let's move on to MCQ number 3. The diagram shows some cells in the root of a plant that is absorbing water from the soil. Okay, so guys, always remember this point, that soil is around the root hair. This is the root hair, as you all know, and root hair is the part of the root hair cell. So guys, cell 1 is the root hair cell. So always remember this thing, that the water from the soil enters the root hair, and then from the root hair it goes into the root hair cell, and from there the water goes from the root hair cell to the adjacent cells. Always remember this point, that water, as it enters the root hair cell via root hair, the water will now travel to the center of the root. Guys, if we draw the root over here, if I draw the root over here, so the outermost layer of the root is the epidermis, and as you all know that the epidermis contains the root hair cells. So the outer layer that I have drawn over here is the epidermis, and guys, epidermis contains the root hair cell. So this is the root here. And then if we go from the epidermis into the center, what cells do we see? We see the cells of the cortex, and then eventually we see the xylem cell. This is the cell of the xylem. Okay. So guys, always remember this point, that water enters the root hair. It will then travel from the root hair cell to the cell of the cortex. The water will travel from cell to cell and eventually will go into the xylem in the center. As we all know, the xylem is in the center of the root. This is the xylem vessel or xylem cell. These are the cells of the cortex. And this is the epidermis. And guys, epidermis contains the root hair cells. So as you all know that water is traveling, and water is traveling from the root hair cell, or we can say from the soil to the root hair cell, and from the root hair cell to the xylem, the water is traveling from a higher water potential to a lower water potential. So in the MCQ, the examiner is asking that how does the water potential of the cell marked 2 differ from the water potentials of the cell marked 1 and 3. So guys, as we all know that water is traveling from cell 1 to cell 2 and from cell 2 to cell 3. It means that if we talk about water potentials, the water potential of cell 1 is greater than the water potential of cell 2 is greater than the water potential of cell 3, because water is moving from 1 to 2 to 3. So water always flows from higher water potential to lower water potential. So if we talk about cell 2, it has a water potential that is lower than cell 1, and 2 has a water potential which is greater than cell 3. So if we talk about the water potential of cell 2, then it is lower than that of the cell 1 and higher than that of the cell 3. The answer is C. Let's move on to MCQ number 4. Which statement about enzymes is not correct? Guys, we have to select a statement. We have to select a statement that is not correct for the enzyme. All enzymes are made up of proteins. This is the correct statement, guys. All enzymes are biological catalysts. This is also correct. Enzymes are destroyed during the reaction they are involved in. No, guys. Enzymes remain chemically unchanged at the end of the reaction. They are not destroyed by the reaction. This is the wrong statement, and this is the answer. The answer is C. Most human enzymes work best at temperatures between 35 and 40 degrees Celsius. This is true for most of the human enzymes. MCQ number 5. What is the effect of lack of nitrate ions on the plant leaves? So guys, as we all know that nitrate ions are required for growth. So if there is a lack of nitrate ions, there will be poor growth. So what should be the answer? The young leaves will grow very slowly in the absence of or in the lack of nitrate. Let's move on to MCQ number 6. The graphs show how two different conditions affect the rate of photosynthesis. Which conditions are being altered in graph 1 and graph 2? So guys, if we look at the graph 2, if on the y-axis we have rate of photosynthesis, and the graph is somewhat like this. This is definitely an enzymatic graph which shows the effect of temperature on the rate of reaction. As we all know that rate of photosynthesis, or we all know that photosynthesis is also a metabolic reaction or an enzyme catalyzed reaction. As we all know that photosynthesis is an enzyme catalyzed reaction. So the rate of photosynthesis will be affected by the temperature in the similar way as the rate of other reactions. Guys, always remember this point. Whenever there's temperature on x-axis and rate of any metabolic reaction, which could be respiration, which could be photosynthesis, on the y-axis, you will observe a graph like this, because this is the graph typical for all the enzymes, and this is the graph of temperature versus the rate of any reaction that is catalyzed by enzymes. So in graph 2, the condition being altered is temperature, and in graph 1, the condition being altered is carbon dioxide concentration. Guys, always remember this point, that whenever you see rate of photosynthesis on y-axis and a particular variable on x-axis, and if the graph is like this, that first the rate of photosynthesis increases and then becomes constant, the variable on the x-axis could be CO2 concentration or it could be light intensity. So with both variables, the graph is the same. So over here we have only one option, that is carbon dioxide concentration together with temperature. The answer is B. Let's move on to MCQ number 7. A plant has leaves with both green and white areas. So guys, the leaf has both white and green areas. The white areas do not contain chlorophyll. The white areas do not contain chlorophyll, or we can say white areas have no chlorophyll, whereas the green area contains chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is present. As you all know guys, that for photosynthesis to occur, what conditions are required? Chlorophyll is required, light is required, carbon dioxide is required, and water is required. Okay. One of its leaves is partly covered with an aluminum foil which blocks the light. So guys, there is an aluminum foil which blocks the light, and if the light is blocked, obviously photosynthesis will not occur because light is required for photosynthesis. The plant is then placed under a lamp for 24 hours. After this time, discs are cut from the areas of the leaf shown and tested with iodine solution. So guys, what is the experiment over here? We are testing the factors needed for photosynthesis. So over here we have a leaf with green areas and white areas. Green areas contain chlorophyll, white areas do not contain chlorophyll. Then we have placed an aluminum foil over a particular part of the leaf which covers the part of the leaf and blocks the sunlight. Then we have left the leaf in light for 24 hours. Guys, remember this point, that whenever we keep a leaf or a plant in light, what happens? If photosynthesis occurs, what will happen? Glucose will be produced, and this glucose will be stored as starch. So in any area of the leaf, if photosynthesis occurs, you will find starch there. It means that that part of the leaf will stain blue-black with iodine solution. Whereas the areas where photosynthesis will not occur, starch will not be produced, glucose will not be produced, glucose will not be converted to starch, and the starch will be absent. So those areas where photosynthesis does not occur, those areas will stain yellow-brown with iodine. So which of the leaf discs will give a blue-black color when tested with iodine solution? What do you think, guys? The answer is Y only. And why is that so? Guys, if we talk about area X, at area X there is no chlorophyll, so photosynthesis will not occur, and starch will be absent, and X will stain yellow brown, not blue black, right? So this area will not stain blue black. If we talk about Y, so guys, Y is an area which has chlorophyll. This area also has light, because this area is not blocked by this area is not covered by the aluminum foil, and light is not blocked. So Y has light, Y has chlorophyll, Y has carbon dioxide, Y has water. So all the factors are present. It means photosynthesis will occur at Y, and starch will be present, and this area will stain blue black. Guys, if we talk about W and Z, they are covered with aluminum foil. If we talk about W does not contain chlorophyll, and it's also covered with aluminum foil. So there is no light at W, there is no chlorophyll at W, so photosynthesis will not occur, starch will not be found, and W will stain yellow brown with iodine solution. Guys, if we talk about Z, so Z has chlorophyll, it is a green area, it has chlorophyll, however it does not have light because light is blocked by the aluminum foil. So at Z photosynthesis will not occur, and Z will also stain yellow brown. So only Y is the area which will stain blue black with iodine solution. So the answer is D. Let's move on to MCQ number 8. The diagram shows a section of the wall of the small intestine. So guys, this is a section from the wall of the small intestine which shows villi, into which structure are most of the lipid components of the diet absorbed for the transport to the rest of the body. So, guys, you should remember this point that this vessel, not blood vessel, sorry to say, this is a lymph vessel which contains a fluid called lymph. Blood vessels contain a fluid called blood. This is a type of vessel which is a lymph vessel actually that contains another fluid called lymph, and the lymph vessel which is found in the villi is known as the lacteal. So guys, always remember this point that fats are always and always absorbed into the lacteal. Fats are not absorbed into the blood capillaries. So the answer is A. Because in the MCQ, we have to choose a structure which is involved in the absorption of lipid components, in which structure are most of the lipid components of the diet are absorbed for transport to the rest of the body. The answer is lacteal, that is A. Guys, D is the blood capillary, and other nutrients besides lipids are absorbed in the blood or the blood capillaries. B is the cell of the villus. And so is the C. Okay, let's move on to MCQ number 9. The diagram shows the arrangement of human teeth in the lower jaw. So guys, this is the lower jaw and this shows the arrangement of teeth. Which tooth is an incisor? Okay guys, let's label the teeth. The first 4 teeth in front are incisors. One tooth adjacent to the incisors is the canine. So we have canines on both sides. We have one canine on both sides of the incisors. Then behind the canine there are 2 premolars on both sides. And behind premolars there are 3 molars on both sides. So guys, we have to identify the incisors. The incisors are D. The answer is D. Let's move on to MCQ number 10. Which statement describes the function of the stomach? It absorbs indigestible food material. Guys, indigestible food material is never absorbed. The food that is digested can only be absorbed. So the function of the stomach is not the absorption of indigestible food material, because indigestible food material cannot be absorbed. Let's move on to option B. It is the place where protease and bile work. Guys, protease works in the stomach but bile does not. Bile is released into the duodenum. Bile works in the duodenum and ileum, not in the stomach. However, stomach contains a protease known as pepsin, and pepsin works in the stomach. It is the first place in the alimentary canal where starch digestion happens. So guys, this is the wrong statement, because the first place for starch digestion is the mouth. Starch digestion begins in mouth because mouth contains salivary amylase, which breaks down starch. It secretes protease and strong acid. Yes guys, this is the true statement. Stomach produces hydrochloric acid, it secretes hydrochloric acid, and it secretes a protease called pepsin. Let's move on to MCQ number 11. Which statement best describes the movement of water through the stem of a plant? So guys, as we all know that when the water moves through the stem of the plant, the water is moving up the xylem vessels. Water moves up the stem as it evaporates from the leaf. Guys, this is the right statement, because as you all know that evaporation occurs from the cell walls of the mesophyll cells. You all know that in the leaf there are mesophyll cells, spongy mesophyll and palisade mesophyll cells. So their cell walls are moist. The water evaporates from these cell walls and is converted into water vapor. Water vapor is then lost via the stomata. This process is transpiration. So as the water is evaporated and as the water is being lost by transpiration, the water potential in the leaf falls. I'm repeating this point again, that guys, as the leaf is losing water by evaporation and transpiration, the water potential of the leaf falls and the water potential in the root is high. So the water travels up the xylem from higher water potential to lower water potential. So always remember this point, that whenever water evaporates from the leaf, whenever transpiration occurs, a transpirational pull is generated, which pulls the water up the xylem. So if there is no transpiration, there will be no pull of water up the stem. Transpiration is necessary for the upward movement of water along the xylem in the stem. So the answer is A. Water moves up the stem as it is pushed by the water entering the roots. No guys, water is not pushed. Water moves up the xylem or up the stems by the pull, not push. And that pull is the transpirational pull. Water moves up the stem because it is used in photosynthesis. No guys. Water moves up the stem because it is lost by transpiration. Water moves up the stem by osmosis. No guys. Water does not travel up the stem by osmosis because there is no partially permeable membrane in the xylem vessels. Xylem vessels are dead cells without any partially permeable membrane, so osmosis cannot occur. The answer is A. Let's move on to MCQ number 12. A plant was placed in water containing black dye. After 24 hours, the plant was removed and sections were taken from the root and the stem. Okay guys, whenever you place a plant in a water containing the dye, always remember this point that the dye together with the water is taken up by the xylem. So only the xylem will stain with the dye. This is very important point. Whenever you place a plant in any dye, the dye will be taken up by the xylem and xylem will stain with the dye. Phloem will not stain. So what is done in this experiment? The plant was first placed in a water containing the dye and the plant was left for 24 hours. Then the plant was removed and sections were taken from the stem and the root. Which diagram shows the results? So guys, you should know that the xylem will get darker. If we talk about the root, yes, in the root, the center part is the xylem, which is the X part. This is the xylem in the root. And as we see in the option A, that this part has stained. And xylem should stain. This is correct for the root. And for the stem, as we all know, that the outer parts of the vascular bundle are phloem and the inner part is the xylem. So again, in the stem, we see the right option of xylem being stained. So answer is A. Let's move on to MCQ number 13. In a muscle, which two substances show net movement from the plasma into the tissue fluid? Guys, if we talk about a muscle, so which two substances show net movement from plasma into the tissue fluid? Always remember this point that from plasma, nutrients will go into the tissue fluid. Always remember this point. From the plasma, nutrients will go into the tissue fluid, and from the tissue fluid, waste products will go into the plasma. So right now, we have to state the substances which will have net movement from plasma to tissue fluid. These should be the nutrients, and nutrients are glucose and oxygen. So guys, the answer is C. Let's move on to MCQ number 14. This is a very good MCQ. A patient inhales a drug. Guys, what is meant by inhale? What is meant by inhale? The drug is taken by breathing in. Inhale means that drug is inhaled or taken by breathing in. So guys, as we all know that whenever we breathe, what happens? If we inhale a drug, so the drug will first go into the trachea, and then from the trachea, it will go to the bronchi, and then from the bronchi, it will go to the lungs, or we can say from the bronchi, it will go into the bronchioles, and from the bronchioles, the drug will go into the alveoli, and from the alveoli, the drug will go into the pulmonary capillaries. It will diffuse into the blood and pulmonary capillaries. And as you all know, that alveoli are surrounded by capillaries known as the pulmonary capillaries. So when the drug will reach the alveoli, it will diffuse from the alveoli into the pulmonary capillaries. Pulmonary capillaries will join to form pulmonary vein. So the drug will go into the pulmonary vein. And from the pulmonary vein, the drug will go into the left atrium. So this is the pathway that will be taken by the drug. Okay. Which chamber of the patient's heart would be the first to receive the blood containing the drug? So guys, they say in the MCQ, they are asking that which chamber of the patient's heart would be the first one to receive the blood containing the drug? The answer will be left atrium, because left atrium is the first chamber to receive the blood containing the drug. So the answer will be B, because as we see from the flow chart, the first chamber of the heart to receive the drug or the blood containing the drug is the left atrium. The drug will then flow from the left atrium to the left ventricle, and from left ventricle to, yes guys, to the aorta, and from the aorta to the rest of the body, as you all know, and from the rest of the body it will come back. Where? It will come back via the vena cava to the right atrium. So guys, right atrium is the third chamber which will receive the drug, and right ventricle will be the fourth chamber to receive the drug. So guys, the first chamber to receive the drug is the left atrium, the second chamber is the left ventricle, third chamber is the right atrium, and fourth chamber is the right ventricle. The answer is B. Let's move on to MCQ number 15. Which table shows vessels carrying blood to and from the heart, liver and lungs? So guys, if we talk about the blood vessel to the heart, so pulmonary vein, as you all know, takes blood from the lungs to the heart, and pulmonary artery takes the blood away from the heart, away from the organ. Okay, if we talk about the liver, hepatic portal vein carries blood to the liver, that is the deoxygenated blood and nutrient-rich blood coming from the small intestine. And as you all know, that hepatic vein is the blood vessel which takes blood away from the liver. If we talk about the lungs, the blood vessel that brings the blood to the lungs is the pulmonary artery, and the blood vessel which takes the blood away from the lungs is the pulmonary vein. So the answer is C. Let's move on to MCQ number 16. Which statement about anaerobic respiration in humans is correct? It only happens in the cells of the lungs. No guys, anaerobic respiration can occur in any cell. Always remember this point. Whenever there is lack of oxygen, anaerobic respiration will occur. If there is a lack of oxygen in any cell, or we can say if the oxygen demand is more than the oxygen supply, that means if the cells need more oxygen than they are getting, so the cells will respire anaerobically. It only happens when oxygen supply exceeds oxygen demand. No guys, oxygen demand should exceed the oxygen supply. There will be more oxygen required and less oxygen supplied. It releases carbon dioxide. No guys, anaerobic respiration in humans is the lactic fermentation. And in lactic fermentation, simply what happens is that the glucose is broken down into lactic acid. So this happens in anaerobic respiration in humans, and no carbon dioxide is produced. It releases less energy than aerobic respiration. Yes guys, anaerobic respiration always releases less energy than aerobic respiration, because as you all should know that in anaerobic respiration, glucose is partially broken down. There is absence of oxygen, the oxygen is absent, so glucose is partially broken down and not completely broken down. So less energy is released in anaerobic respiration. In the presence of oxygen in aerobic respiration, glucose is completely broken down. So aerobic respiration yields more energy and anaerobic respiration yields less energy. Let's move on to MCQ number 17. The diagram shows the human gas exchange system. Which label shows the position of the larynx? So guys, as you all should know that A is the larynx or the voice box. Guys, what about B? B is the trachea. C is the lung. D is the bronchus. Okay, MCQ number 19. This is a very good MCQ. The graph shows how the pressure and volume inside the lungs change during one complete breath. At which point are the muscles of the diaphragm starting to contract? So guys, as you all know, the diaphragm contracts when we breathe in, right? When we breathe in, so diaphragm contracts. And always remember this point, guys, whenever diaphragm contracts, the volume of the lung increases. As you all know the mechanism of inhalation and exhalation. What happens when we want to breathe in? The diaphragm contracts and it moves downwards and pulls the lungs downwards. So lung is stretched and the lung volume is increased. And the air pressure in the lung is decreased. And the surrounding air pressure dominates, so air enters into the lungs. I'm repeating this point again, guys, that how do we breathe in? First, the lung is stretched. First, the lung expands, the volume of the lung increases. So as the volume of the lung increases, the air pressure in the lung decreases. And surrounding air pressure is higher. So air flows from the surroundings into the lungs from high pressure to low pressure. So at which point, what do you think? At which point will the diaphragm start contracting? The diaphragm will start to contract at A, because guys, after A, what is happening? The lung volume is increasing, right? At options B, C and D, what do we observe? At option B, the lung volume is decreasing. So this is when the diaphragm is relaxing, the person is breathing out. When we breathe out, what happens? First, the diaphragm relaxes, it moves upwards, it pushes the lungs, squeezes the lung volume decreases, and the air pressure in the lung increases. So air is forced out of the lungs. Okay, always remember this point, whenever we breathe, the lung volume increases and air pressure in the lung decreases. Okay, let's move on to the next MCQ, that is MCQ number 19. The diagram shows the kidneys and their associated structures. Which row identifies P, Q, R, and S? So guys, as you all know, P is the kidney, Q is the ureter that comes out of the kidney, and ureter takes urine from the kidney to the bladder, R is the bladder, and S is the urethra. The answer is C. Let's move on to MCQ number 20. By which mechanism would the body be able to lose most heat on a hot, dry day if the surrounding air temperature is higher than the body temperature? So guys, if a person wants to lose heat on a very hot day, so for that, the person should produce more sweat. The sweat glands will become more active, secreting more sweat, and as the sweat evaporates, the heat will be lost from the body on a very hot, dry day. Let's move on to MCQ number 21. What are the short-term effects of adrenaline on the body? So guys, as you all know, that adrenaline increases the heart rate, it increases the blood pressure, it causes vasoconstriction, it breaks down, it stimulates the liver to break down glycogen into glucose, and so it raises the blood glucose concentration. So you should know that the adrenaline increases the blood glucose concentration because it stimulates the liver to break down glycogen into glucose, and the glucose is then released into the blood, right? And the blood glucose concentration rises. Adrenaline also stimulates an increase in the heart rate. So 3 and 4 options are correct, 2 and 1 are wrong, because one states decreased blood glucose concentration. No, adrenaline causes the increased blood glucose concentration, and adrenaline increases the heart rate. So the answer is 3 and 4, D. Let's move on to MCQ number 22. How does hormonal control usually differ from the nervous control? Okay guys, the response of the body to various stimuli can occur due to hormonal control or nervous control. Hormonal control is when a response is brought by effector due to hormones, and nervous control is when the response is brought about by the effector due to the electrical communication. Let me give you an example. Whenever I touch a very hot cup, what happens? My hand withdraws. So that response is due to nervous control, because the responses generated by the nervous control are very, very fast and short lasting. Always remember that. Whenever I touch a hot cup, I will immediately withdraw the hand, and the response was for the short duration or short term. And however, the response was very fast. because there was electrical communication. Whenever I touch the hot cup, electrical impulses travel from the receptor to the sensory neuron, from the sensory neuron to the relay neuron, from the relay neuron to the motor neuron, and from the motor neuron to the effector. That is the muscle of my hand. So I withdraw my hand. This was an example of the nervous control, and as you all know, it was very fast. The speed of message was very fast. The electrical impulses travel very rapidly, and the duration of effect was short term. If we talk about hormonal control, so for example, maintenance of blood glucose concentration. When the blood glucose concentration rises, what happens? Insulin is released, which is a hormone, and insulin then causes the blood glucose concentration to decrease back to normal, right? So when you consume a meal, the blood glucose concentration rises and insulin is released. It takes a very long time for insulin to decrease the glucose concentration back to normal. Around 90 minutes or 1 hour 30 minutes are required by the insulin to decrease the glucose back to normal. Also, the hormones travel in blood and they travel very slowly. So in nervous control, the message is in the form of electrical impulses which travel very rapidly. In case of hormonal control, the message is in the form of hormones which travel in blood and they travel slowly as compared to the electrical impulses. And the hormonal control, the hormones act for a very long time. Their duration of effect is long term, whereas if we talk about the nervous control and electrical impulses, the responses are short lasting and duration of effect is short term. So in the MCQ, the examiner asks, how does hormonal control usually differ from the nervous control? So guys, in case of hormonal control, the speed of message is slower and the duration of effect is long term in case of hormonal control. The answer is C. MCQ number 30, MCQ number 23. Let's move on to MCQ number 23. A girl is waiting at a bus stop and is watching a bus traveling towards her. What happens to her eyes as the bus gets closer? So guys, this is all about the accommodation reflex. What happens? The bus is getting closer. So the far vision is converted into the near vision. So guys, for the near vision or close vision, for close vision, there's a rule of 5 C's. Rule of 5 C's. Okay. So what do these C's stand for? C for close vision or near vision. As we can see that the bus is approaching the girl and the girl can still see the bus without the image being blurred. So the far vision is converted to near vision. Still the image is in the focus. The bus will be in the focus. So what will be the changes? What will be the accommodation in the eye? For close vision, always remember that ciliary muscles, C for close vision, C for ciliary muscle, C for contract. So the ciliary muscle will contract and what will happen guys? The suspensory ligaments will slacken or will become loose. So guys, slacken suspensory ligaments. Suspensory ligaments will become loose. There will be less tension in the suspensory ligaments. And convexity increases. Lens becomes more convex. Convexity increases. The lens becomes more rounded, more thicker, more convex. So what will happen guys? Ciliary muscles will contract more. The suspensory ligaments will lose tension. There will be less tension. They will be slackened. And the change in the shape of the lens is that lens will become more rounded and more convex. The answer is D. Let's move on to MCQ number 24. The diagram shows the skeleton of a dog. Which bone is the radius? So guys, as you all know, the radius is in the upper limb. Over here we can see the two upper limbs of the dog and these are the two lower limbs. Radius is found in the upper limbs and also we can say that radius is found in the forelimb, that is the upper limb, and also in the forearm. Guys, if we talk about this entire portion, this is known as the upper limb or forelimb. And this is the arm and this is the forearm. So guys, radius is found in the forearm. So which one is the radius? Guys, to recognize radius, you need to recognize ulna and also humerus. As we all know that arm has humerus. There is a humerus bone in the arm, the only bone in the arm, and ulna has a U-shaped head. This is the ulna bone, and ulna has the U-shaped head which fits into the humerus. So guys, C is ulna, and the bone besides, or the bone on the side of the ulna is the radius. So guys, B is the radius. B is the answer. Alternatively, how can you recognize radius? Over here we cannot see, but radius has a ring like this, which will help you to recognize the radius. But over here you have to exclude ulna. The U-shaped head, this is the ulna with a U-shaped head. And we can say that this bone is the radius, which is running alongside the ulna. The red bone is the radius over here. The answer is B. Let's move on to MCQ number 25. Which statements about the use of heroin are correct? Addiction occurs as higher and higher doses are needed to get the same effect. Yes guys, whenever you become addicted to a drug, what will happen? To produce the same effect that you got the first time, you need higher and higher doses of the drug. For example, when the person takes heroin the first time, the effect is marvelous. The effect is optimum on a low dose. When the person takes the heroin second time, to get the same effect, the person needs higher dose. And the third time, the dose will be even more higher. So when addiction occurs, the person needs higher and higher doses to achieve the same effect. This is true. Everybody who takes a dose of heroin becomes an addict. Guys, this is not necessary that if a person takes heroin for the first time, the person will become addict. This is not necessary. Tolerance to heroin means a user can survive higher and higher doses. Guys, this is true for any drug. Drug tolerance is that when you can survive higher and higher doses of a drug, that is called drug tolerance. So tolerance to heroin is when the person can survive higher and higher doses of the heroin. Medical assistance is always necessary to withdraw from the heroin addiction. No, not necessary. Many people have withdrawn from heroin without the medical assistance. Medical assistance is required, but it is not always necessary. The answer is B. Let's move on to MCQ number 26. What are the characteristics of bacteria? Guys, as you all know that all bacteria contain cytoplasm, all bacteria contain DNA, but there is no nuclear membrane in the bacteria because there is no nucleus in the bacteria, so there is no nuclear membrane. The answer is B. Let's move on to MCQ number 27, which can be produced using bacteria. Guys, as you all know that bacteria are involved in yogurt and cheese making. For alcohol and bread making, yeast is required. So the answer is 3 and 4 only. The answer is C. Let's move on to MCQ number 28. What eventually happens to all the energy in an ecosystem? So guys, the energy enters the ecosystem as light energy. Light energy comes from the sun. This energy is absorbed by the producers, and producers use this energy in photosynthesis to produce carbohydrates. Then the plants respire on these carbohydrates, and when the plants respire on carbohydrates, energy is released which is converted to heat. When these carbohydrates are passed on to the next organism, for example from the producer to herbivore, the herbivore also respires on the carbohydrates. When the herbivore respires, energy is released which is converted to heat. So guys, eventually all the energy that enters the ecosystem, it is lost from the ecosystem as heat. Remember this point, that all the organisms in an ecosystem respire, and when they respire, energy is released that is converted to heat and is lost as heat to the surroundings. MCQ number 29. Which statement about the organisms at the beginning of the food chains is correct? So guys, at the beginning of the food chain, there are producers which photosynthesize. So, at the beginning of the food chain, the organisms absorb nutrients and they photosynthesize. The answer is D. MCQ number 30. The diagram shows part of the carbon cycle. What are the processes X and Y? So, guys, in X, what we see that green plants are releasing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So, when the green plants release carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, they do this by a process of respiration. When green plants respire, they produce carbon dioxide and release carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Guys, if we talk about why, so there are dead organisms and decomposers will feed on dead organisms and the decomposers will respire, releasing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Guys, this is also respiration. When decomposers release carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, this is also respiration. So the answer is X is also respiration and Y as well. The answer is D. Let's move on to MCQ number 31. How does an anti-malarial drug controls malaria? So guys, anti-malarial drug acts against the anti-malarial drug acts against the malarial pathogen, that is Plasmodium. Always remember this point, that anti-malarial drug is not against the mosquito, it's against the Plasmodium. It kills the mosquito when the mosquito bites a person. No, guys. It kills the pathogen in the bloodstream. Yes. When we take this drug, the drug is in the blood, and when the pathogen enters the blood, the malarial pathogen, that is the Plasmodium, will be killed by the anti-malarial drug. The answer is B. It prevents the mosquito from breeding. No. It stops the pathogen entering a person's blood. No. Guys, the pathogen will still enter the person's blood when the mosquito bites, but the pathogen will not survive in the blood because there will be drug in the bloodstream which will kill the pathogen. MCQ number 32. Many of the world's major rivers have dams to control the flow of water. Which consequence of this is for the long-term benefit to humans? So guys, always remember this point. The dams are made to store water for future use, for future drinking purposes. So guys, the answer is D, that many of the world's major rivers have dams to control the flow of water. Which consequence of this is the long-term benefit to humans? The long-term benefit to humans is that by creating dams, we will store water for humans to drink in future. The answer is D. MCQ number 33. A male gamete leaves the pollen tube. Immediately after the pollen tube has entered which structure? So guys, if we talk about the growth of pollen tube, for example, this is the stigma and this is the style, and guys, this is the ovary, and the ovary contains the ovule, this is the ovule, and ovule contains the female gamete. So guys, where is the male gamete? Male gamete is over here in the pollen grain. For example, this is the pollen grain, and over here there's a male gamete, for example. So what happens when a pollen lands? When a pollen lands, a pollen tube grows. So guys, this is the pollen tube that is growing, and the pollen tube grows like this. It grows along the stigma, it digests the stigma, and then it digests the ovary wall and enters into the ovule where there's a female gamete. So guys, always remember this point, that when the pollen tube grows till the ovule or till the opening of the ovule. The opening of the ovule is the micropyle. When the pollen tube grows till ovule or the opening of the ovule, only then the male gamete will be released. Are you getting my point? The male gamete will only be released from the pollen grain. The male gamete will only be released from the pollen grain when the pollen tube grows till the micropyle, that is the opening of the ovule, or we can say till the ovule. So the MCQ says a male gamete leaves the pollen tube immediately after the pollen tube has entered which structure? The answer is ovule. Or if the option was micropyle, that would be correct as well, because micropyle is the opening to the ovule. Let's move on to MCQ number 34. What are genetically identical? Brothers and sisters in the same family? No, guys. Brothers and sisters in the same family are not genetically identical because brothers and sisters in the same family are produced by sexual reproduction, and the organisms or the offspring which are produced by sexual reproductions are genetically different. Cuttings taken from the same plant. This is true, guys. If we take cuttings from the same plant, for example, if we take the stems from the same plant or the leaves from the same plant, they will be genetically identical. Gametes from the same parent are genetically different, guys, because if we talk about any one parent, father, for example, if the father is producing gametes, that is the sperm. So sperm are produced by meiosis, and when meiosis occurs, all the cells that are produced are genetically not identical to each other. Meiosis is a type of cell division in which a diploid cell divides to form four daughter haploid cells, and these four daughter haploid cells are genetically different from each other. So if we talk about a male, the male that produces sperm, if the male is producing millions of sperms, those all sperms will be genetically different from each other. So gametes from the same parent are also genetically different because they are being produced by meiosis and not mitosis. Seeds produced by the same tree. Guys, seeds are produced by fertilization, that is the fusion of male and female gametes. So when the male and female gametes fuse, these gametes are from the different parents, and obviously they are genetically non-identical from the parents as well. So the seeds are produced by fertilization, by the fusion of male and female gametes. So seeds are genetically different from the original plant. MCQ number 35. Let's move on to MCQ number 35. The diagram shows some of the stages in the human reproduction from ovum, egg to the fetus. Where in the body does stage 2 occur? So guys, stage 2 over here is fertilization, where the sperm fuses with the ovum. So you guys should know that fertilization occurs in the female reproductive system. And where in the female reproductive system exactly? In the oviduct. Guys, ovum is released from the ovaries, and this ovum travels in the oviduct. The sperm swim to the oviduct, and in the oviduct or the fallopian tube, sperm meet the ovum and fertilize the ovum. So always remember this point, that oviduct is the site of fertilization in humans. MCQ number 36. Which row correctly pairs a hormone with its function in the menstrual cycle? FSH stimulates the release of eggs. No, guys. This is the function of LH. FSH stimulates the development of eggs. Always remember this point, that FSH is follicle stimulating hormone, and eggs are in the follicles. So when the follicles are stimulated, the eggs develop. So follicle stimulating hormone is involved in the development of eggs and not the release of eggs. LH or luteinizing hormone is involved in the release of eggs. So the answer is B. Because for LH, what is the correct match? Stimulates the release of eggs. If we talk about estrogen, so guys, estrogen repairs the uterus lining, not maintains. The uterus lining is maintained by the progesterone. Always remember this thing, that progesterone causes the thickening of the uterine lining, and progesterone maintains the uterine lining or the uterus lining, whereas estrogen repairs the uterus lining. The answer is B. Let's move on to MCQ number 37. Two heterozygous plants are crossed. What is the likely ratio of homozygous genotypes to heterozygous genotypes in the offspring? Guys, let's cross the two heterozygous plants. For example, there are two heterozygous plants with the genotype, that is capital A small a, capital A small a. This is heterozygous genotype because both alleles are different. This is also heterozygous genotype. If we draw the gametes, so what will be the gametes? The gametes of one parent will be capital A small a, and same goes for the other parent. Let's draw a box, that is the Punnett square. Okay, so if we cross the two parents, the offspring that we get are capital A, capital A, capital A small a, capital A small a, small a, small a. Okay, so guys, how many heterozygous do we get? We get two heterozygous. And how many homozygous do we get? We get two homozygous, right? Capital A is homozygous, and small a is homozygous. Capital A small a is heterozygous, and capital A small a is heterozygous. So guys, heterozygous genotypes, how many heterozygous genotypes do we get? Two. And how many homozygous genotypes do we get? Yes guys, how many heterozygous genotypes? Two. And how many homozygous genotypes? Two. So if we simplify, the ratio will be 1:1. The answer is A. Two homozygous genotypes, that are capital A, and small a, and two into heterozygous genotypes, that is capital A, small a. Let's move on to MCQ number 38. Which row shows the sex chromosomes when parent have a baby boy? So guys, if we talk about a boy, if the baby is a boy, so in the zygote there will be XY chromosomes, because in males, in humans, there are XY sex chromosomes. And always remember this point, that if the baby boy, if the child is a boy and there are XY chromosomes, so X chromosome comes from the mother in the egg cell and Y chromosomes comes from the father in the sperm cell. The answer is B. That's because only males have Y chromosomes. So only males can pass on the Y chromosome. Y chromosome will always be received from the father and Y chromosome will be in the sperm, and mother will only pass on the X chromosome. So in the egg cell there will be X chromosome and in the sperm cell there will be Y chromosome. Let's talk about MCQ number 39. Which statement about the process of genetic engineering is not correct? So guys, we have to select a statement about genetic engineering which is not correct. Animals with suitable organs for transplant can be developed in the laboratory. Guys, this is true. For example, if someone has end-stage liver damage, that is cirrhosis, and the liver has failed, and we want to transplant the liver into the person, what we can do is that we can take the DNA from the person whose liver has failed, and we can put this DNA into a cell of an animal, and we can develop animal from that cell, right? So when the animal develops, we can take out the liver from the animal and transplant into the person who has the liver failure, right? So we are doing this to get the liver which is genetically identical to the recipient, right? If liver fails in a person and we take liver from a donor, from a human donor that is not closely related, so there is a chance of tissue rejection. So to avoid tissue rejection, what we do, that we grow organs in labs using animals, and for that, for the organs that we produce in labs, for the organs to be genetically identical to the recipient, the person that requires the organ, we need to make sure that we take out the DNA from the recipient person who needs the organ and we put that DNA into the animal. So this is genetic engineering basically. This is the right application of the genetic engineering. Gene therapy can be used to prevent infectious bacterial diseases. Guys, this is the wrong statement and this is the right answer. This is not correct about genetic engineering. Guys, genetic engineering is never used to treat the infectious diseases. The diseases which are caused by bacteria are treated by antibiotics and not by gene therapy. Guys, what is meant by gene therapy? Gene therapy is an application of genetic engineering in which we treat genetic diseases. For example, if a patient has sickle cell anemia, and in sickle cell anemia, the patient has two faulty alleles which are causing the production of abnormal hemoglobin. So to treat a person with sickle cell anemia, what we can do, we can insert a normal allele into the person, that is the normal dominant allele HbA. The patient of sickle cell anemia has both HbS alleles. Both are faulty alleles that are resulting in the production of abnormal hemoglobin. What we can do, we can insert HbA allele which is a normal allele. So HbA allele will then express itself and normal hemoglobin will be produced. So the person will be treated. The sickle cell anemia of the person will be treated by gene therapy. So guys, gene therapy, always remember that gene therapy is the application of genetic engineering that can be used to treat genetic disorders which are caused by recessive alleles. Gene therapy can not be used to treat infectious diseases caused by bacteria. For that we use antibiotics. So option B, statement B, is not true or not correct about the process of genetic engineering. Okay, option C, It can be used to make important medical products such as insulin and human growth hormone. Guys, this is true. By genetic engineering, what we can do, we can take out the insulin gene or the growth hormone gene from the human cells and put it into the bacteria. So the bacteria can then produce insulin or growth hormone. Both are proteins. Plants can mate to resist pests and diseases. Yes, guys, we can insert a gene into a plant that makes plant resistant to insects or diseases. So when the insect bites the plant, the insect will die because the plant contains such gene that produce a toxin which is toxic to the insects. So by inserting the gene into a plant, we can make the plant resistant to the diseases and to the insect pests. And we can also add or insert genes to the plants to produce bigger fruits with more flavor. So all the applications are of genetic engineering except treating treating bacterial infections by gene therapy. This is not possible. MCQ number 40. Which term describes reproduction between those members of a species that are best fitted to their environment? Guys, the answer is C, natural selection. Guys, natural selection is a process by which, or we can say natural selection is when the environment selects the individuals which are best adapted to the environment. The environment favors the survival of those individuals which are best adapted to the environment. By natural selection, only those organisms survive which are best adapted to the environment, and only those organisms reproduce. So the term that describes reproduction between those members of a species that are best adapted to the environment is known as natural selection. For example, if there are two types of rabbits in a tropical rainforest, one rabbit is brown and the other rabbit is white. So what do you think? Which rabbit will survive? The brown rabbit. That's because the brown rabbit can camouflage around the tree stems, and the white rabbit will be clearly visible to the predators. So the white rabbits will be killed because white rabbits are not best adapted to the environment. Brown rabbits are adapted to the environment of the tropical rainforest. So the brown rabbits will only survive, and the environment is favoring the survival. The environment is according to the brown rabbit. Environment is favoring the survival of the brown rabbit, and the brown rabbit survives and reproduces. This is called natural selection. So guys, we are done with the paper. I hope every MCQ is crystal clear to you all. Guys, kindly subscribe to my YouTube channel for more videos. Thank you so much for watching. Allah Hafiz everyone.